one common theme in the WNBA is how poorly officiated these games can be. The lack of competence from the people wearing the striped suits. Every time I watch a WNBA game, a thought crosses my mind when it comes to the officials, and that thought is, how much money do you have on this game? What prop bet did you place prior to suiting up tonight? What's the over/under, and are you concerned with a specific outcome? The officials in the WNBA, yes, they're incompetent, yes, they're trash, but it always seems like there's some shady, they're so bad and so incompetent, it seems like there's shady business taking place behind the scenes. If the WNBA needs to investigate in anything, it's how dirty the hands are of some of the executives that own these teams. How dirty are the hands of some of these players that are in this league? Oh yeah, tonight's the night I'm just gonna go 2 for 13. Oh, hey, it's the WNBA. I can slide into 2 for 13 and nobody will bat an eyelash. I can shoot 5 for 22 and nobody will really think twice because it happens so.
But if you really want to understand the soul of this team, look no further than Lexie Hull. She walked onto that court with 2 black eyes from a vicious collision in a previous game. Most players would have sat out, recovered, waited for the bruises to fade. Not her. She suited up. She fought through the pain. She became the living symbol of what this Fever team stood for: battered, underestimated, but refusing to quit. That's the spirit that defined the Indiana Fever on that night. They weren't the favorites. They weren't the healthiest, but they had something the Sparks didn't: an unshakable heart. Odyssey Sims embodied that spirit. Facing her former team, she wasn't just playing basketball, she was writing her own revenge story. When the Fever needed points, she stepped up, scoring the final 5 that kept their playoff hopes alive. And then there was Aaliyah Boston, the young cornerstone who, game after game, had to fight through brutal officiating. Her own coach called her the worst officiated post player in the league. But on this night, Boston didn't complain. She didn't flinch. She dominated. 22 points, a career-high 6 steals. She put the team on her back, dragging them toward victory with sheer force of will. By the final minutes, the Fever had clawed their way to a 76-75 lead. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. They had overcome the injuries, they had silenced the doubt. They had done everything you're supposed to do to win a basketball game. What they didn't realize was that their biggest opponent wasn't wearing a Sparks jersey. Their biggest opponent was standing a few feet away, in stripes. Because in the final seconds, when the Fever had finally earned their triumph, something happened that no one could explain. Something that turned a gritty victory into a national controversy. The Fever had fought tooth and nail to get here. With just seconds left, they were clinging to a fragile 76-75 lead. The Sparks had thrown everything at them, and yet Indiana's grit looked like it was about to be rewarded. All they had to do was hold on. Then came the moment every athlete dreams about, and every fan dreads. Kelsey Mitchell, one of the league's most trusted scorers, stepped to the free throw line with 4.0 seconds remaining. 2 shots. Make them both, and the game is all but sealed. Miss them, and you leave the door cracked open. The arena fell silent. The ball left her hand, clanked off the rim. First miss. The pressure doubled. She bounced the ball, exhaled, and let it fly again. Another miss. The Sparks were alive. Even then, the Fever had still done enough. The clock should have run out, ending the game. The Sparks had no lifeline left. But that's when the confusion and suspicion began. The referees suddenly intervened. Instead of letting the game end naturally, they awarded the Sparks a timeout and unbelievably put 0.1 seconds back on the clock. A tenth of a second. For anyone who's ever played basketball, that's not even enough time to catch the ball, let alone shoot it. It's a fragment, a blink, an impossibility. The Fever players looked around in disbelief. The bench was on edge. Fans at home were already firing off posts online. What are we watching? How is this even legal? That tiny sliver of time should have been meaningless, but it became the crack in the door the Sparks needed. Instead of a hard-earned Fever win, the final moments descended into pure chaos. The last 3.9 seconds stretched into nearly 5 minutes of real time as the officials seemed determined to engineer a miracle for Los Angeles.
Every whistle, every reset, every decision felt like one more step away from fairness. And with each second that dragged on, the tension in the arena turned from excitement to suspicion. Something didn't feel right. This wasn't normal. This wasn't basketball. And sitting on the sideline, unable to play but very much alive in the moment, Caitlin Clark could no longer contain her fury. What should have been a clean ending to a hard-fought game turned into a circus, the kind of chaos that makes fans shake their heads, players lose their cool, and everyone watching at home wonder if they were witnessing a setup. With 0.1 seconds suddenly put back on the clock, the referees suddenly had control of the game's destiny. And instead of letting the Fever's grit pay off, they dragged the finish into a bizarre marathon of stoppages, reviews, and second chances for the Sparks. The final 3.9 seconds, less than the time it takes to sip from a water bottle, stretched into nearly 5 agonizing minutes of real time. Whistles blew, players shuffled around in confusion. The officials conferred again and again, as if searching for a way, any way, to hand Los Angeles another shot. For the Fever, the frustration was unbearable. They had already beaten the odds, overcoming injuries, hostile crowd energy, and the weight of playoff pressure. And now, their biggest obstacle wasn't the Sparks at all. It was the people in stripes. Caitlin Clark, sitting on the bench in street clothes, became the emotional epicenter of the drama. She wasn't even playing, but the cameras couldn't look away from her face. Her face said it all. Wide-eyed disbelief, shaking her head, shouting at the refs, throwing her hands up in sheer outrage. This wasn't a player sulking over a foul call. This was the most important figure in the WNBA, watching the credibility of the league unravel right in front of her. And the internet noticed immediately. Clips of Clark erupted across social media. Fans posted side-by-side images of her furious reaction with captions like, "We all felt like Caitlin last night." Even neutral observers were baffled, asking how a game could be extended, twisted, and stretched into something that looked more like theater than competition. For the Sparks, it felt like lifelines were being tossed their way again and again. For the Fever, it felt like theft in broad daylight. Every call, every delay, every adjustment by the referees chipped away at the trust fans had in the game. And by the time the final buzzer finally sounded, the sense of injustice was overwhelming. The truth is, Clark's eruption didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't just about one whistle or one strange replay. This was the breaking point of something that had been simmering for weeks, even months. A pattern of questionable officiating, of players begging for fairness and getting ignored. And now, on the biggest stage, the frustration could no longer be contained. But to understand why Clark lost it, why the Fever bench was seething, you have to step back and look at the bigger picture. Because this wasn't just one ugly night, it was part of a disturbing pattern.
What happened in Los Angeles wasn't an isolated meltdown. It wasn't one bad game for the referees. For the Indiana Fever, this was just the latest chapter in a story they'd been living all season long. A story of silence, fines, and double standards. Coach Stephanie White has been carrying this fight by herself for months. She's spoken up about the officiating, about the way her players are treated compared to the league's bigger market stars. And every single time she's raised her voice, the league's response has been the same. Fine her, shut her down, and sweep it under the rug. But her words have been consistent, and her message has been impossible to ignore. She's pointed directly at the injustice her players face every night. Kelsey Mitchell? She says she gets held or shoved on every single possession and never gets a whistle. Aaliyah Boston? According to her coach, she's the most unfairly officiated post player in the entire league. She takes the same contact other stars do, But instead of fouls, she gets silence. It's not just a difference in calls, it's a pattern. And it's not only White who sees it. Fans have been screaming it from the stands. Analysts have whispered it on broadcasts. And now, with Caitlin Clark's eruption plastered across the internet, it's impossible to hide anymore. The numbers back it up too. Boston, despite being one of the most dominant interior players in the WNBA, doesn't get the foul calls that match her level of contact. Mitchell, known for her aggressive drives, spends entire games battered without reward. And when the Fever's coach points it out, she's told to stop complaining. This isn't how a league is supposed to treat its athletes. It's not how you grow the game. And yet, instead of addressing the problem, the WNBA has chosen to punish the truth tellers. So when Clark erupted on the sideline, it wasn't just about that single moment. It was about months of bottled-up anger. It was about her teammates being denied fair treatment night after night. It was about a locker room that had been forced to bite their tongues while enduring one-sided whistles. The Fever had reached their breaking point. And this time, they weren't the only ones. Because if the referees thought they could silence the outrage by finding a coach, they hadn't yet seen what would happen when the players themselves started speaking out. For most of the season, the Indiana Fever's frustration had been bottled up. The players gritted their teeth, kept their heads down, and trusted their coach to take the heat with her fines. After this game, the silence shattered. Sydney Colson, sidelined with a torn ACL and forced to watch from the bench, did what the officials never expected. She took the fight to social media. Her words were a direct hit, aimed squarely at the heart of the league's credibility. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't hold back. She said exactly what every Fever fan had been screaming at their TV. At a certain point in the league's existence, I need for Kelsey Mitchell to get the same whistle as other stars. The way she gets assaulted is insane, actually. That wasn't just frustration. That was an accusation. A statement that one of the league's brightest guards was being physically attacked on the court without consequence while officials looked the other way.
And then she pushed it even further, half serious, half deadly serious, saying she'd considered asking her sister, a lawyer, to pursue legal action. Think about that for a moment. An active player suggesting her teammate is treated so unfairly, so brutally, that she might as well explore charges. It was a bombshell. Caitlin Clark saw the post almost instantly, and her first reaction was instinctive, a warning. "Careful," she told Colson, "you're going to get fined." Because Clark knew exactly how the league operates. She'd watched Coach White take hit after hit for simply telling the truth. She understood the risk. But Colson wasn't backing down. She doubled down, mocking the referees for repeatedly handing the Sparks lifelines, calling the officiating a joke and making it clear she was willing to risk the money to speak the truth. That's the moment everything shifted. Because once the players start speaking out, not just in post-game interviews, but directly to the fans, unfiltered, unedited, the league loses control of the narrative. No amount of fines can erase the screenshots. No amount of press releases can smother the outrage. And for the Fever, this wasn't just venting. This was a rebellion. They were no longer content to let their coach be the only voice in the fight. They were no longer content to swallow injustice and move on. The trust had been broken, the patience had run dry, and the referee's credibility was collapsing in real time. The cracks in the wall of silence were now wide open, and through those cracks came something even darker. Whispers about why this kept happening, and whether it was really just incompetence or something much more deliberate. When outrage hits the court, it's impossible to ignore. But when whispers start surfacing off the court, that's when the story takes a darker turn. Because after the chaos in Los Angeles, the conversation among fans and insiders shifted from bad refereeing to something much more sinister. Was this deliberate? For weeks, there had been quiet talk behind the scenes, rumors of discretionary bonuses being handed to certain referees, not official league salaries, not performance incentives everyone could see. No, these payments were said to be funneled through third-party consulting firms hidden behind layers of contracts and accounting. The alleged amounts? Anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 per season. Not life-changing money, but just enough to raise eyebrows. And the stated purpose of these payments? That's what sent chills down people's spines. They were described as to maintain competitive balance. Think about what that really means. If these rumors are true, it suggests that the referees weren't just managing games, they were influencing outcomes, shaping narratives, making sure certain teams didn't get too hot too fast, making sure the league's storyline stayed balanced, even if it meant punishing the very players who were carrying the WNBA to new heights. And for the Fever, that possibility hits like a dagger. Is it really a coincidence that so many of their most controversial endings have piled up in the same season? That their coach has been screaming about bias while their star is sidelined and their young core is repeatedly battered with no calls? Or is the league quietly trying to keep a rising team from upsetting the balance of power too soon? Of course, nothing here has been proven. These are rumors, whispers, speculation, but the timing couldn't be ignored. They exploded right as the Fever were caught in the middle of one of the most suspicious endings of the year. And if fans were already doubting the officials before, the idea that referees might be receiving secret payouts only poured gasoline on the fire.
Because now, it wasn't just about incompetence. It wasn't just about a bad whistle or a missed call. It was about the integrity of the league itself. And at the top of that league sits Commissioner Cathy Angelbert, the person fans expected to restore trust, but whose response only made the storm even worse. When trust in the referees started to collapse, there was one person everyone looked to for answers: Commissioner Cathy Angelbert, the league's top official, the person with the power to restore confidence in the system, acknowledge mistakes, and protect the integrity of the sport. But instead of calming the storm, Angelbert poured gasoline on it. Her response to the Fever's complaints wasn't transparency. It wasn't accountability. It wasn't even a promise to review what happened. Instead, she turned to the same playbook the league had used all season. Silence the critics, find the truth tellers, and gaslight the fans. Coaches who dared to point out inconsistencies hit with fines. Players who expressed frustration threatened with penalties. And when pressed about the officiating, Angelbert's public stance was dismissive, almost insulting. No winning team ever complains about officiating. That statement landed like a slap in the face. Because in Los Angeles, the Fever did win. They overcame injuries, battled through chaos, and still found a way to close it out. And yet their sideline was erupting in protest. Their players were fuming. Their star was melting down on national television. They weren't complaining because they lost. They were complaining because they almost had their victory stolen right out of their hands. To fans, Angelbert's words didn't sound like leadership. They sounded like gaslighting, an attempt to frame legitimate outrage as sour grapes. And in the process, she made herself part of the story. Instead of protecting her athletes, she appeared to protect the system that was failing them. For a league trying to grow, trying to capitalize on the momentum brought by stars like Caitlin Clark, that was a devastating miscalculation. Because every time Angelbert downplayed the problem, the cracks in the WNBA's foundation grew deeper. The Fever's outrage was no longer just about a few bad calls. It was about a league that refused to listen. A commissioner who chose to punish dissent instead of addressing reality. And a system that looked less like incompetence and more like conspiracy. Which is why, by the time the Fever finally walked off that court with the win, the question hanging in the air wasn't, did they survive? It was something far more dangerous. Can players even trust the league that's supposed to protect them? The Fever walked out of Crypto.com Arena that night with the victory, but it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like survival. They had fought through bruises, injuries, and a relentless opponent. But the real fight wasn't with the sparks, it was with the system itself. Aaliyah Boston's game-sealing steal symbolized what this team is all about, refusing to let anyone take from them what they've earned. Yet, as powerful as that moment was, it didn't erase the bigger problem. The referees who made those decisions are still on the floor. The system that allowed them is still intact, and the commissioner who dismissed every complaint is still in charge. Which means the next crisis isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And hanging over all of this is the looming return of Caitlin Clark. After 19 games on the sidelines, she's already back in shoot-arounds. Clips of her warming up are going viral, and her comeback is days away. Her return should be a triumph, a moment of hope for a Fever team that has fought through every obstacle. But instead of excitement, there's fear. Because if the Fever have faced this much chaos without her watching from the bench, what happens when she's back on the floor? What happens when the league's brightest star, the player driving record-breaking ratings and ticket sales, is directly in the middle of games where the officiating is already under fire? A healthy Clark makes the Fever exponentially more dangerous. She changes the playoff picture, the ratings, even the league's headlines. But for a system that whispers about maintaining competitive balance, that makes her both an opportunity and a threat. And that's the chilling part. If the Fever could barely survive with Clark watching from the bench, what will the league do when she's leading the charge again? Will they let the story play out naturally? A gritty, injury-plagued team finding their rhythm just in time for a playoff push? Or will we see more strange calls, more bizarre endings, and more attempts to control the narrative? One thing is certain, the attempt to tilt this game failed. But in the process, the referees in the league exposed something much bigger. They revealed the cracks in the foundation. They showed the world that even the most beloved star can't protect the game from what's happening behind the scenes. Caitlin Clark's eruption on the sidelines wasn't weakness. It was a warning shot, a scream that forced the league's dirty laundry into the spotlight. And if the whispers, the patterns, and the defiance of her teammates are any indication, this was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning.
Was this just a bad call? Or did we just witness the WNBA caught in the act of trying to rig a game? That's the question fans around the country were asking after one of the strangest, most suspicious finishes we've ever seen in women's basketball. It wasn't a small mistake. It wasn't something you could just shrug off as human error. What happened in those final seconds of the Indiana Fever versus LA Sparks game was so bizarre, so blatantly unfair, that it left players, coaches, and fans in absolute disbelief. And right at the center of it all was Caitlin Clark, the face of the league, the superstar who has brought more attention to the WNBA than any player in recent memory. Except this time, she wasn't lighting up the scoreboard. She wasn't dazzling with her logo threes. She was sitting on the sideline in street clothes, screaming in disgust as she watched her team's hard-earned victory nearly get stolen by the very people who were supposed to protect the integrity of the game.
You could see it in her body language, the frustration boiling over, the shaking of her head, the shouts toward the officials. For weeks, there had been whispers about shady officiating. Fans called it paranoia. Coaches got fined for even hinting at bias. But on this night, in front of the cameras, the nightmare played out for everyone to see. The referees didn't just make one questionable call. They strung together a series of baffling decisions, stretching the final seconds into nearly 5 minutes of chaos and giving the Sparks chance after chance to steal a win. And as the crowd sat in stunned silence, Clark exploded. This wasn't just anger. This wasn't just a star player upset about a foul. This was the league's biggest attraction, the athlete single-handedly carrying record-breaking ratings, watching the game she loves get dragged into the mud. Fans online immediately knew something was wrong. The clip spread like wildfire, millions of people replaying the same sequence, asking the same question. How is this possible? How could the referees twist the rules like this right in front of everyone? And if you think this was just a bad night for the officials, you'd be wrong. Because the truth is, this wasn't an isolated incident. This was the boiling point of something much bigger. A season filled with questionable officiating, players begging for fairness, coaches being silenced, and rumors that go far beyond human error. What happened in Los Angeles wasn't just about one team or one game. It was a flashpoint. A moment when the cracks in the league's foundation could no longer be ignored. And once you see the evidence, once you connect the dots, you'll realize this might not have been a mistake at all. To understand why this moment hit so hard, you first need to understand what the Indiana Fever walked into that night. August 29th, Crypto.com Arena. The Fever weren't just facing the Sparks. They were facing the weight of their entire season. A season filled with setbacks, heartbreaks, and constant questions about whether they could survive without their star. Caitlin Clark, the generational talent who had transformed the league's spotlight overnight, hadn't touched the floor in 19 games. A nagging groin injury had sidelined her, leaving her teammates to carry the load in her absence. And they weren't just missing Clark. 3 other rotation players were out too. For a team that was already young, already battling to prove themselves in a league that often stacked the odds against them, it was a brutal hand to be dealt. They were clinging to a playoff spot by the thinnest of margins. Every game mattered. Every possession mattered. And this matchup against the Sparks could decide whether their season ended in heartbreak or glory.